What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, where me and my good friend Danny over there talk about horror movies and streaming shows. One of our favorite streaming shows just came to an end. It is Horror's Greatest, which is streaming now on Shudder. Danny, I was thinking this week's episode, which is Stephen King adaptations, that's like right in our wheelhouse, right? Because we talk a lot about Stephen King. Our channel's named after an object that's in a Mike Flanagan movie. He's adapted a ton of Stephen King things. And I mean, we just need like Interview with the Vampire in here somewhere and we'd be good.
Yeah, I mean, we could just say that a Stephen King is a horror author, and another popular horror author from the same time period was Anne Rice.
There you go. Tied
Terrible
it all together,
segue.
yeah. Yeah, so if you guys like our stuff, because like we do talk about Mike Flanagan, that's where the channel name comes from. We're big Stephen King fans. We reviewed a lot of his stuff. And of course, like we just said, we've covered the Interview with the Vampire show and talked a lot about that stuff. Make sure you subscribe. Getting that out of the way right now. Danny, you've seen pretty much all these adaptations?
I'm looking. I don't think I've seen every single one of them, but
Yeah.
I definitely have seen. I definitely have seen a lot of them. Yeah. Now that I'm looking at the ones that I wrote down to take notes on.
Yeah.
I've seen them all.
Yeah.
And I've seen others that that they never even mentioned.
Right.
I Googled it. I think it said there were 65 movies based on Stephen King. And to me, I was like, that seems low.
Wow.
Like it feels like there's more than that.
Yeah.
And they're not counting, of course, TV miniseries.
Right.
So, like, technically, Salem's Lot from 1979 was a TV miniseries. One that notably was actually two that were completely left out of this, which I thought was a bizarre choice. And again, I mentioned this last week that sometimes I feel like they pick movies based on what they can get clips from. And if there's, and there could be like certain, there's a reason why not certain movies are not on Shudder. And maybe, so like the ones that really threw me off were, they opened this by talking about the It Part 1 from 2017, directed by Andy Muschietti, a movie that I think both of us really enjoy.
Yes.
They, probably for good reason, make it very clear that they are only talking about It Chapter 1 and not Chapter 2.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of humorous.
Right.
But they completely left out the 1990 It miniseries, which for people our age was incredibly important television. And it was foundational in my appreciation of horror, my appreciation of Stephen King. That is one of the first things that I ever watched that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was 8 years old. I had to sleep with the lights on and the TV on for like a month after seeing it in 1990. And the other thing that they left out completely was the Stand miniseries, which I really felt was bizarre because Mick Garris was one of the talking heads, which makes perfect sense. Mick Garris has adapted Stephen King a lot. They made a point to talk about Sleepwalkers, but they didn't mention The Stand, which was I believe it, what was it, 4-part miniseries back in 1992? Yeah. And that was my dad's favorite Stephen King book. And that was like event television back when I didn't have cable and there was no internet and I didn't have a Regal Unlimited pass. And so like sitting down to watch 8 hours of TV to watch The Stand. And to many, it's Stephen King's like Bible. Like that is it. Like obviously the Dark Tower series, but that is not really for everybody. It's kind of its own thing. The Stand was like his epic, like Homer's Odyssey, and to me, leaving that out, as especially with Mick Garris sitting right there, felt weird.
Yeah.
I think they even showed a clip of Stephen King doing a cameo in it.
Yes.
So I thought it would get a mention. But I think, this is something that you, me, and Mike talked about last week with the horror comedies is, and I know Chris has been talking to us also, on Twitter in our group chat, how there's some movies that feel where it's very weird that they didn't make the cut.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of movies and shows that it felt weird that they spend a lot of time on. Like last week, I think Mike and I kind of disagreed on Megan appearing in the horror comedies list.
Yeah.
And like Chris's point was there's so many like actual horror comedies that have come out in the last couple of years that would have maybe been a great example. They have had the writer of The Blackening is one of the talking heads for this entire series, but they didn't mention The Blackening under horror comedies.
Right.
Maybe it's because they included it with like the first episode, which was on tropes. I'm doing my traditional like open the video ramble, but they could have done an entire series on Stephen King adaptations.
Right. Well, I mean, it's weird because don't you almost feel like the set and everything is the same set as 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments? And that like it's just maybe even just footage from that they couldn't fit into it. I know that like last week, you, me, and Mike had talked about maybe this is just like extra stuff from that they put into this show. But it is weird the choices that they make. I understand like not showing the TV miniseries, but they used it for when they showed his cameos. Like it's weird the subjects that they've picked for it. And the very last one is Stephen King adaptations. I think Stephen King adaptations definitely deserves a slot on horror's greatest, but like maybe they should have ended with the tropes or something, like go out on a bang or something. And I don't know if you noticed this too, right? But I noticed this last episode and then this episode, there's like weird freeze frames that they do in the show where they'll show like a scene from a movie and then it'll freeze at the end. It's almost like the end of like a movie from the 80s where they'll like, like they'll like show a scene.
The jump scare ending.
Yeah, but just
freeze frame ending.
Yeah, it's even like the Breakfast Club or like Top Gun or something where it like freezes. And they do it with these movies that don't have freeze frames. I find it to be very jarring. But
it is interesting, yes.
But what's interesting to me is the actual talking heads that they pick to talk about it, because like in the beginning here, I had a ticker that said Mike Flanagan, Frank Darabont, and Mick Garris. You already talked about Mick Garris a lot. They have Mike Flanagan's wife on there, and she talks about him, but she always says Mike Flanagan. She never says my husband, Mike Flanagan. So it feels kind of weird.
She's very professional.
Right. And then besides that, they have Joe Hill, who's Stephen King's son, and he talks about Stephen King as well. He eventually does say my dad, but it's like towards the end of the episode. And then Joe Hill brings up some really great points too. He says that the best adaptations of Stephen King works are The Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me. And he said it's because it's like these like pieces about characters and focusing on the characters in the story. And he said that like when you try to copy the scares in Stephen King books, it doesn't work. Would you agree with that?
So you've read a lot of Stephen King, right? Yeah. So like I've read a lot of Stephen King, and I've read a lot of Stephen King lately. The pandemic, on a positive note, got me back into reading. When I was running a lot, I was listening to a lot of Audible, and I was banging out Stephen King books on my runs all the time.
Yeah.
And what makes him such a compelling author. What makes you able to just go through book after book after book after book is his unique ability to actually write scary situations, but also to write characters that you genuinely care about most of the time.
Right.
And like in the book The Shining, you care about Jack Torrance, you care about Wendy, you care about Danny and the whole family, and you care about the all of the characters in The Stand, even the ones who are on Randall Flagg's side. You actually care about all these characters. That's why I think it's not just Shawshank, Stand By Me. I think the best of his movies overall are the movies where the director writes the character, does exactly what Joe Hill said.
Yeah.
That's why, to me, the best modern Stephen King adaptation, and I don't think I'm shocking anybody when I say this, is Dr. Sleep.
Oh, I knew this was coming.
Because Dr. Sleep, Flanagan does what Flanagan does, and he writes amazing dialogue for great characters.
Right.
And he also manages to put on screen some of the most truly horrific things you've ever seen.
Right.
Baseball Boy is, I can't think of a way that could have been done any worse. And by worse, I mean well. I can't think of an actor who has shown alcoholism in a way recently, the way that Ewan McGregor portrays alcoholism in that movie. And, and then I think about Rob Reiner's Stand By Me and Misery. I think of Darabont, even The Mist. And the reason The Mist's ending works as well as it does, if they were just 4 people in the grocery store, the ending is still shocking, but it's not as effective.
Right.
Like, I was trying to explain to Charlotte when they showed like scenes from The Mist. I was like, Charlotte, you don't understand. When I saw this in the movie theater, the movie ended and nobody moved. Like, nobody moved. Nobody like instinctively got up and like ran to nobody even started like turning and talking to their friends. Everybody was just like stunned silent.
Yeah.
And it took like a good 40 seconds to a minute before anybody was able to like, oh, the movie's over. I should put my jacket on and leave.
Right.
And like, you don't feel like that unless you care so much about the characters involved. King does that so well as a writer, and the best adaptations are the movies like that. And I think there are some genuinely great horror movies in there. Mm-hmm. I think that's why both part ones of it are so good.
Right.
Because we love these fucking kids. We love all of them. We love all of their idiosyncrasies, all of the weird stuff that makes them different. The acting of those kids is so good. And both actors who played Pennywise in very different ways, Tim Curry and Bill Skarsgård, are terrifying.
Yeah.
And they're doing awful things, and they're threatening awful things to the kids. And so, I mean, Gerald's Game is another Flanagan adaptation where it's like, I friggin' love Jessie so much, Carla Gugino's character so much, and I'm rooting for her so hard. But then there is some genuinely tense, horrifying moments. And then there is, as I think it was Kate Siegel said, one of the grossest moments in the history of movies, which
I think that was, what the hell is her name? God damn. She has red hair and glasses. She's a film historian.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
It's okay. Like, the people that have actually watched this show will know who we're talking about. Rebecca McKendry. There we go.
Oh, yes. Rebecca McKendry. Good.
But then besides Rebecca McKendry, there's also the woman who like directed episodes of Mayfair Witches and
Axel Coraline.
Right. So it was
Axel
either one of
Cowan,
those two
yeah.
that said that thing about the degloving scene. And they even did the fucking freeze frame on the degloving. Like she's being degloved, and at one point just like freezes on the degloving in this episode.
I actually fast forwarded the Gerald's game scene and the ending of the Mist part because Charlotte has not seen either of those movies.
Oh shit. Okay.
And I didn't want to ruin them.
Yeah, good call.
And I still am not sure with Gerald's game because it's very heavy material.
Yeah.
Where like the stuff that I would care about her seeing is not like the traditional horror stuff.
Yeah.
But
it's
yeah,
that you say like traditional horror stuff, right? Because one of the things that you were talking about before that I wanted to comment on was the way that these things end and how they're adapted faithfully or not faithfully. And it's interesting because they mentioned this quite a bit in this episode where they would change the ending of certain things. They changed the ending based on people's reactions. And they said that Frank Darabont, he changed the ending of The Mist to where it has that gut punch, horrible ending. In the book, it has a much more hopeful ending. They talk about Kuho at one point. I have to say Kuho, thanks to Joe Hill. Cujo. They talk about that movie at one point. They say how in the book, the little boy dies. So they make these changes. And it's interesting because it's not always that King has these nihilistic, dark endings and Hollywood makes them happier. Yeah. Sometimes it could go either way. Like sometimes it is dark and they make it happy. Sometimes it's bleak and they make it better.
Yeah. Tom Holland also told the story about Thinner, a movie that I'm shocked. I feel like Thinner is a totally disposable Stephen King movie. It's fine. It's not terrible, but no one is ranking Thinner in their top 10 Stephen King adaptations. But I feel like they got Tom Holland, so they're going to show the Tom Holland one. Yeah. And I love Tom Holland. He's been on our channel and I can listen. He's got that like old man voice. Very direct. Yeah. I love his voice. He's like on my short list of like who I would want to narrate a book about my life. But like he tells the story about how he wanted to make a super dark ending for Thinner where the main character figures out a way to stop the curse. Right. And the only person in the world that loves him, his daughter, ends up accidentally taking the curse on herself. Right. And he was like, oh, well, we screened it. I filmed it. I screened it and they hated it. And he even called out the film studio. He's like, they made me change the ending. Yeah. And I mean, I know that happens like a lot and then of course, again, we can come back to Dr. Sleep and The Shining, where basically Stanley Kubrick filmed the entire Shining, I think, while holding up his middle finger to a picture of Stephen King. Right. And then Mike Flanagan, and this was a Kate Siegel line, and I thought it was such a great line. I know what you're going to say. Calls Dr. Sleep the beautiful child of two divorced dads, or two divorced parents.
Two divorced parents, yeah.
Yeah, and I still marvel at Dr. Sleep, and because, did you read Dr. Sleep?
I started it, but I didn't finish it. Not because it's bad. Yeah, I had it from the library. Go ahead.
So, it's good. It's not The Shining. The Shining is far better. The book, I mean. Yeah. But also, the ending really kind of falls a little flat. And because there is no Overlook. The Overlook is gone. The ending
of a Stephen King book falls flat?
No, but not in like the it's a giant spider way. It's just my biggest problem with the book is that I never felt that adult Danny and Abra were in any danger of Rose the Hat and the True Knot. I thought the book does not present them as villains that could take Danny down. Okay. And the movie introduces them, and right away we meet Rose the Hat, and a cute little girl is murdered and eaten, and you're like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
And baseball boy scene happens, and I think Flanagan did such a great job of improving on that book, and the ending, which he had to make a sequel to both the movie and the book at the same time.
Right.
I think it is one of those rare adaptations where it's a movie that outdoes the book.
Right.
And I just marvel at his ability to do that. Because also, as much as The Shining is a bastardized version of what King wrote, it's still one of the greatest horror movies of all time.
Right. And they talk about that, and they talk about how, like, the Jack Nicholson, Jack Torrance is not likable throughout the whole movie, whereas he's likable in the book. I think you even mentioned that just now, too. I mean, that's the whole subject of this episode, is like adapting King's work into film. And it's great because they have examples from all the major filmmakers that have adapted his work. You have Rob Reiner with Misery. You have Brian De Palma with Carrie. You have Frank Darabont. Cronenberg, right, with The Dead Zone. So they show how all of these guys, and then, of course, Carpenter with Christine, right? And what's really interesting, Tom Holland makes this one point about how, I think he even said this when I interviewed him too, how really horror being the way that it is today is because of Stephen King. Like, Stephen King brought horror into the mainstream. He made it about regular people, regular situations, and that's why. And he said that adapting Stephen King stuff has its pluses and minuses, because he said there's like a great source material to work with. He says that, like, his name, though, Stephen King's name, sort of outshines everything. And it's just so funny because when you think of all these movies, when you think like Carrie, I think film guys will be like, oh, Brian De Palma, or like Christine, you think, oh, John Carpenter. But in general, it's like Stephen King, but you have these directors that they have their own iconic works that they don't even need these Stephen King adaptations in their pantheon or whatever to make a note, but they have this, like, their version of a Stephen King story. And it's interesting because some of them just like radically change things, and some of them are more faithful. And I feel like Flanagan is a much more faithful adapter than other directors.
Yeah, and I think also when like, the whole thing with Gerald's Game was that, and Kate Siegel mentions it was like the unfilmable book. Yeah, because it's so few characters. It's basically, in the book, it's like 6 different versions of Jesse talking to her, and so like Flanagan just whittled that to basically just Carla Gugino. It's going to be Carla Gugino. Yeah. And she's going to be talking to herself, and Bruce Greenwood is going to be dead on the floor, but he's also going to be talking to her. Right. And it really does just make the movie so much smoother. I think also that because of what you said with Stephen King bringing horror into the mainstream, I think the reason that there are so many Stephen King adaptations is because a lot of times, you can make a fast dollar just by advertising Stephen King adaptation. Right. Like, I'll never forget one of the absolutely bad movies that I've seen. Was a movie called The Mangler. Yep. Which was advertised as 3 legends of horror. Right. Stephen King, Tobe Hooper, and Robert Englund. And I'm like, an evil fucking laundry machine. Yeah. And like, The Mangler is a short story. Yeah. In one of his, it's either Night Shift or Skeleton Crew or one of those early short story books. And like, you take a 15-page short story, and it becomes a 90-minute movie about an evil laundry press. And there's so many examples of those types of movies that are just like that The Lawnmower Man. Yeah. Which was, again, a short story. I think it's like 30 pages long, and it becomes something that is nothing at all like what is in it, but you can put on the poster Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man.
Right.
You know, nobody even mentions The Running Man.
You're right. Richard Bachman
is a Bachman book.
Right.
And
right,
that is one of my all-time favorite movies, but
right.
not because of
Stephen King.
You know, not because of Stephen King. It's because it's obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime 80s,
right,
chomping cigars and spewing amazing one-liners.
Right.
And it has next to nothing to do, like the crux of the movie about a futuristic game show where people fight for their lives.
Right.
That's the book. But it has nothing to do, like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Yaphet Kotto, like it bears next to no resemblance.
Well, I think what's interesting, and here I'm going to take credit for this point because they don't mention this in the show, but you have two different types of people that adapt Stephen King movies. You have the people that are essentially his contemporaries, like the people that are around his age. So like Mick Garris is around his age. Frank Darabont's around his age. Tom Holland is around his age. Then you have the people that like in their formative years are growing up read Stephen King. And I think that makes a big difference. Like Mike Flanagan is deeply influenced by Stephen King. And I think that like a modern filmmaker making a Stephen King movie is going to make something different than the people that started out, you know, like John Carpenter and Brian De Palma. And one major sin that this show fucking did, they had a list of like must-see Stephen King movies, and they put the fucking Boogeyman on it. Do you remember that?
That movie came out last year.
And did you fucking even see it?
Yeah, it was fine. It was nothing special. That was on that list at the end?
I swear to God, I wrote down in my notes, The Boogeyman, ? Yeah, that was on one of the lists of like his must-see movies.
I think that the I don't know. Like, again, like, look, we all have favorites, right? Yeah. I unabashedly love Graveyard Shift.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
And David Desmalchian actually brought it up at the beginning. He's like, there's a Stephen King adaptation for everybody. You can love your Shawshanks or you can love your Graveyard Shifts. And I was like, yes.
Yes.
And then they actually showed a clip real fast of it.
Yeah.
I like, yeah, that would be on my list of like maybe top 20 just because of how silly it is and how much I enjoy the villain in the movie.
Sure.
But yeah, the Boogeyman would not. But like, you know, there's more of those other, the Shawshanks and the Stand By Me's of the world. The Green Mile, which they do show a lot of in this, is an amazing movie. Right. I think it was nominated for Best Picture the year it came out.
Yeah,
I think probably. That was it might have been up against it was 99 because I remember Michael Clark Duncan is one of the I believe he's one of like the great crew of actors who lost to Michael Caine for the Cider House Rules.
Oh,
Cider House Rules.
Oh God, Jesus.
Did you ever see Dolores Claiborne?
I did not, and Sherry would definitely like kind of roll her eyes at this because she always wants me to watch Dolores Claiborne, and I never fucking watch it. And she says it's really good.
It's great, and it's Kathy Bates coming back to Stephen King after she won an Oscar for playing Annie Wilkes. You know, there's so many. Like that's the thing. There's so many. And you know, what just occurred to me as I was saying that, like, it's not just the adaptations of Stephen King. It's how Stephen King has his mark is felt on horror outside of his own adaptations, right? Yeah. So, like, perfect example, The Monster Squad comes out in 1987. Right. It's about a group of small kids in a small town fighting monsters. What does that sound like? It sounds like it sounds like
Stand By Me.
Stand By Me, Salem's Lot. so many of these stories. And what is the main kid wearing the entire movie? A bright red shirt that says Stephen King rules.
Stephen King rules. Yeah.
So, like, Shane Black, who wrote, oh God, Shane Black and the guy he always, Fred Decker. Thank you. Shane Black and Fred Decker, Decker writes that movie and directs that movie. Like, you cannot tell me that, like, that is a Stephen King movie without it being a Stephen King movie.
Right.
And there's so much horror fiction. There's so much horror TV. There's so much horror, so many horror movies that feel like that.
Absolutely. And he does have this, like,
Stranger Things. I'm sorry. I Stranger Things is, I mean, the Duffer Brothers have, like, they're not shy with their, like, it's basically Stephen King meets Steven Spielberg.
Right.
Like, it's half it, half E.T.
Right. And I mean, like, he has a distinct style. You feel like a Stephen King thing, like, when you're watching it, except for maybe a few of these movies that are, like, made by, like, auteur filmmakers, like filmmakers that have, like, their definitive vision. But even in that stuff, you could still kind of feel it, because they always kind of take, like, certain lines of dialogue. They take, like, specific characters. So even with Kubrick's version of The Shining, which King hates, you still feel the Stephen King a little bit, just based on the dialogue and the imagery and stuff like that. Tananarive Due talked about how, like, the Overlook looks like what she pictured it would look like based on the book, right? Mm-hmm. So, one thing that I knew they wouldn't cover in the show, you kind of mentioned this already, but there are even, like, TV shows that are based on Stephen King books. Not even the miniseries that we grew up on when we were kids, but there's, like, modern shows, like Mr. Mercedes is a modern Stephen King show. The Outsider, which for some reason he didn't like, but I think is fucking amazing. There was even fucking Lisi's Story, which me and Sherry covered on at the Anchor P channel when I still had it. There's all these modern adaptations of his stuff. There's such a range, but you always feel his presence in his work. And I wanted to, I'd be kind of remiss if I didn't mention this one tweet that Chris shared with us, which I think is great too. We're talking about his influences. Mike Flanagan mentioned how he basically made 1408 when he wrote the movie Oculus. And I think that's such an interesting thing too. Like, I didn't make that connection until Chris shared that tweet with us. But then I'm like, oh yeah, I see the connection there. That's amazing.
Yeah, and there's even, like, the scene where Samuel L. Jackson details the history of the room,
right,
which is incredibly similar to Karen Gillan's monologue in I almost said Dr. Sleep. Dr. Oculus.
Dr. Oculus. That sounds kind of familiar. Yeah. But yeah, she's talking about The Lasser Glass, which is the name of our show, So this is very close to heart. It's funny because, like, we kind of joked around about how many of the horror comedies I saw, how many of the I saw, like, none of the J horror movies. I think that this week's episode, was the one where I've seen the most out of all the movies, because I love Stephen King. My aunt had a subscription to the Stephen King book club when I was a kid, and so she'd always get new Stephen King books, and she's given me some of them. I have a huge Stephen King library at my house. I'm just a fan. I love him. I love Joe Hill.
We have like a separate section of our bookshelf that is like dedicated, and my dad had all my dad and Athena. But my dad had a lot of the Stephen King hardcovers with, like, those, like, iconic covers that they always had, where his name is always, like, in big, bold red letters.
Right.
And my dad, we used to go to a lot of, like, flea markets. Mm-hmm. And this is, like, again, dating myself, but my dad would buy soft covers of like used soft covers for like $1 each. And that was back in the day where, like, for some reason, like, people would rip the covers off of the books because, like, they were afraid that they would get, like, oh, you resold it and we could scan so they would, like, rip the cover off. So my dad had, like, a drawer of coverless Stephen King soft covers.
Right. That's awesome. I mean,
what was the first Stephen King book that you read?
Oh, shit. That's a good question. I got a lame answer to that. The first Stephen King book I read was On Writing, which was, because I always wanted to be a writer. And, but then, I've read a ton of shit since then. I got into The Dark Tower pretty early on, but then I started to get into his horror. And I'd say that my favorite Stephen King book, as cliche as it sounds, is The Stand. I really love The Stand a lot. I was going to ask you, and I think we should both answer this. What is your favorite Stephen King adaptation? And it could be a show, it could be a movie, a miniseries, whatever you say. Out of all of his adaptations, what would you say?
Probably the one that means the most to me as a 42-year-old horror fan, horror super geek, who talks about horror on YouTube, who started a horror club at school. 1990s it I think means the most to me.
Sure.
I cannot stress how scared I was of Pennywise. I didn't like clowns to begin with. I was one of those kids who clowns always freaked me out. I didn't like anything with makeup on the face. I would never at a party or at a block party. I never wanted anybody to paint my face.
Right.
And just the opening scene where he's waving at the girl behind the curtain as it's blowing.
Yeah.
I ran out of the room crying, and my dad was like, I'm going to keep watching it. And I kept watching it from behind a wall. So the one that means the most to me is probably that one.
That's awesome.
What do I think the best Stephen King adaptation is?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a lame answer to say Shawshank because it's just such a great fucking movie? I'm going to say Dr. Sleep.
Yep.
Because I very rarely do I do think there are movies that are better than the books they're based on.
Yes. Oh, fuck. God damn. Danny just cut out. I mean, I'm still recording, but I'll just talk while he's talking, and he'll come back. So anyway, he was talking about Dr. Sleep and how awesome it is. I'll fill this in. This guy keeps getting cut off. I think it's maybe he gets phone calls or something now. But Dr. Sleep, what I'll say is that I went to go see it with my friend Jay. And when we went to go see it, at one point, Rebecca Ferguson, as Rose the Hat, she does this sort of sleepwalk kind of thing, this dream walk thing to go find Abra. And she's floating in the air, in the astral plane, and the world is just underneath her. And I remember turning to my friend Jay and I was like, this is the most Stephen King thing I think I've seen on screen. So for me, I would say that Dr. Sleep might actually be what I consider my favorite Stephen King adaptation, but I loved the Stand miniseries. The Stand miniseries, like Danny was saying before, was event television in the 90s. It had such a big impact on me as well, because I just remember that opening sequence where you had that family trying to escape from the military base and they crash into the gas station. And after they escape, we do this little montage of all the dead people at the military base, and it's playing Don't Fear the Reaper. And I remember watching that with at least my mom. My dad might have been there too, but I remember her chuckling at the fact they were playing Don't Fear the Reaper over this sequence. So there's always that sort of that tongue-in-cheek, a little bit of silliness in Stephen King stuff too. But then there is always that dark, cold, ruthless quality. Danny's already mentioned Baseball Boy 15 times today. And there's just always this meanness. And often it's just by the human characters to other human characters in Stephen King stories versus the evil creatures. But of course they can do horrible things as well. But it's that kind of that Stephen King stew that has that meanness to it, that has the kind of silly weirdness to it, and then also just has these characters which can be like extremely interesting and quirky, but then they're also just like people that you would work with or people that you would see in the supermarket. So, as we've said a whole bunch of times in this recording, I'm a huge fan. I don't know if Danny's coming back. I was going to make this fucking awesome joke about how the Stephen King adaptation that's the, closest to my heart is Dreamcatcher. But, I guess Danny's not going to be here to react to that. He might even be messaging me right now on Twitter saying, "Oh, I got kicked out." But if he doesn't come back in a minute, then I'm just going to wrap this up. Hold on a sec. I'm going to just send him a message. And let's just talk about a couple of other things. I didn't see Cujo. I didn't see The Dead Zone. But then I think everything else that they listed, I have seen on there. I even saw Children of the Corn, and I just saw that recently. But I like how Joe Hill was saying how it's actually pronounced Kuho. Here he comes back. Okay. All right. Boom. Welcome back.
Oh, I wrapped up the episode and said goodbye.
You disappeared completely. I didn't freeze. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny because on my screen you were completely frozen, and I was like, I actually said out loud, I was like, well, Pete either froze or he had a terrible stroke.
Oh yes, no, you just disappeared. So
oh, that's so weird because on my screen it said live and it was still recording.
Yeah.
So were you still talking?
I once you disappeared, I just kept it going. I talked about the movie that's the closest to my heart, which is Dreamcatcher. So
no, it's not. Stop it.
That's right. I also talked about Dr. Sleep and my experience with it. And then I was talking about the Stand miniseries and its impact on me too. But
I'm really interested to see what this video looks like when you watch it back, because
Frankenstein monster of just two middle-aged men being like, "Oh, is he there? Is he there?" But what I was going to ask you, this could be a way to kind of wrap it up. So, what is your favorite Stephen King book then?
It's The Shining and The Stand. Those are. And gun to my head, I think I'm leaning more, at least this week, towards The Shining.
Okay.
Because again, this is like kind of a joke about Stephen King endings. Yeah. I love The Stand, but The Stand, the explosion, like the bomb going off in Vegas, happens, and then. Keep in mind, I read The Stand on Audible, and on Audible, it is 48 hours long.
Right.
2 days of Stephen King.
Right.
And the bomb goes off, and I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what a fucking book. This is an unbelievable. And then I look, and there's like 2.5 hours left.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And so, like, in my head, I'm thinking, how many pages is that in the book? It's probably not that many pages, but it does take a long time for, like, the characters to make it back to Boulder.
Right.
And there's, like, pages of them just, like, finding, like, a shed to sleep out, to, like, get out of the cold weather. And I'm like, okay, get back. Let's go.
Right.
And so I fucking love The Stand,
yeah.
But The Shining was The Shining was so good as a book that it made me question my love of Kubrick's movie.
Damn.
And again, my name is Danny. The Shining is one of those movies that, like, top 5 for me, probably movies that scared me the most.
Right.
And the book was so good, and I love the book so much that I was like, I don't know if I ever really want to watch that movie again. Like, because it's not this book at all.
Right.
And we've talked about this. If you go back probably to 2020 to our archives, we actually reviewed the miniseries that Steven Weber as Jack Torrance, or maybe Athena and I did. I think Athena and I.
You and I didn't cover. You and I didn't cover that, but we covered the Stand miniseries. That was the modern one.
Yeah, Athena and I did a video way back in probably the pandemic where we compared the Shining book, the Shining movie, and the Shining miniseries.
Yeah.
And we talked about, obviously how we love the movie, but it's not the book. And I, for one, had a new appreciation because I remember when that miniseries came out, Mick Garris again, 1997, I believe. I think my first thought was simply, oh, this isn't the movie. This stinks. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
But I read the book years later and I rewatched that miniseries, and it really does do such a better job of capturing what the book is about. It's not perfect. It has like terrible 90s CGI in it.
Right.
And it doesn't really have the iconic moments that the movie does, but it's definitely worth like a reappraisal. But yeah, The Shining and The Stand are like my 1 and 2. Salem's Lot I thought was fucking great as a book. I loved reading The Green Mile, like back when it came out in 6 like 80-page mini novellas.
Right.
And of course, obviously, like you, I fucking love The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower is probably one of the reasons that Athena and I are married and together for 15 years because like I had read the first 3 books in college, and then I read the first 150 pages of Wizard and Glass, and then I kind of got bored of it. And schoolwork piled up, and I put it down, and I never got back to it. And right when Athena and I got together, that's when like suddenly, after like a long break, books 5, 6, and 7 came out.
Yeah.
And we had just started dating. She was she's the biggest, most ferocious reader of anybody I've ever met.
Right.
She like the way I watch movies, she like reads books.
Jesus.
And so she was like, oh, well, the book 5 is coming out. If you want to like reread books 1, 2, 3 and actually finish 4, I'll reread them too. And so like we read them together kind of. And like when books 5, 6, and 7 came out, that was like an event for us. And that was like something that like we like really bonded over like the first year to year and a half we were together.
That's fucking awesome, man. I love that. Yeah, Stephen King fucking brings us together. I mean, it's kind of a reason why we started this channel. I mean, I understand Mike Flanagan was like, the source, but I think that like if Mike Flanagan is the Lastercast dad, Stephen King is the Lastercast's grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are the beautiful children of 2 great writers / filmmakers.
Yep. And neither of them are going to watch this video. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Happy birthday to Stephen King, too. They fucking timed this right. Stephen King's birthday was like 2 days ago. They released it like on or around his birthday. It's also happy birthday to somebody else, but I don't really remember who, right? Isn't your birthday like coming up or today? When is your birthday? No, it's not
the
today.
29th, right?
Sunday, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you guys want to
celebrate your birthday at a wake in Puerto Rico.
Oh, good. Okay, that's the way I want you to celebrate.
Yes.
So perfectly.
Yes. I will try to wake up early and swim in the Caribbean for you on your birthday. Expect a strange text message that morning.
Okay. All right. Wow. No, I mean, if anyone wants to give me a birthday present, the best thing would be to subscribe to the Lastercast, where Danny is like a fucking machine, just always pumping out reviews. We covered a couple of recent movies too. Well, I mean, you did, and then you and I did like Strange Darling and
Red Rooms.
Yeah, right. So
I have a short review of The Substance up on the channel.
Nice. I want to see that
If you have not watched The Substance, it is out in theaters now.
Yeah.
It's a movie that is going to stay with me for a very long time. I don't know how anything is going to possibly top that as my movie of the year.
Holy shit.
It's a movie where for the first hour and 45 minutes, I sat in the theater going, yeah, this is really good. Like, I'm really enjoying this movie. I just don't see what everybody's really going crazy over.
Right.
And then the last 30 minutes of this movie happened, and I sat there with my fucking mouth hanging open for the last 30 minutes. And everyone I've talked to who's seen it has had the exact reaction. Like, this movie was hyped up, and it somehow wasn't hyped enough.
Wow.
For what you see in the movie theater.
That's fucking great.
In case my when I thought you froze, I kind of said a goodbye, but in case that didn't record, I do want to just send a shout out to the Brooklyn Horror Society.
Do that.
Brooklyn Horror Society. That is their, if you look them up on Instagram, they do most of their they do most everything on Instagram.
Oh God, is he freezing again?
No, I'm freezing. I'm tired. They host. What happened? I'm frozen again?
No, nothing. You're good. Oh, keep going. They do most things on Instagram.
They host horror trivias and horror get-togethers, movie nights. They just did a book show, a big book fair. And they run everything out of Lucky 13 Saloon in Brooklyn, down by the Barclays Center. Last night we had horror trivia there, and they allowed me to guest host around. They allowed me to plug the YouTube channel, the podcast, and I really appreciate it. I had a fucking blast. You'll never believe this, but my round was on Mike Flanagan horror movies, Mike Flanagan movies and shows.
Wow.
I had one question where I gave 5 points if you can name each of the 5 Crane children from Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, shit.
To a collective groan from the crowd. It was very good.
That's fucking great.
Yeah. I tried to include every single one of his movies, Netflix series. It was a labor of love. I love doing it, and I really do thank the Brooklyn Horror Society. They do such a great job of bringing the Brooklyn horror scene together.
That's fucking awesome, man. Yeah, I wish I lived in New York sometimes just to go to things like that.
Yeah, no, it's like I was going to go to a wrestling show yesterday. I was like planning on it, and then they asked me, like last Friday, they were like, hey, are you interested in doing this? And I was like, fuck yeah, all right. Sure, and I like passed on a ticket to like a wrestling show to go to see that to go to do that instead.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's funny because I live in Austin, Texas, and right around the time of my birthday is always Fantastic Fest. And Fantastic Fest is where right now they're having this movie, The Heretic, with Hugh Grant. I'm seeing a lot of buzz about that. Mm-hmm. There's also like a movie with like Nick Frost that's like a kind of a horror comedy. It's not what's his face? The guy who did fucking Shaun of the Dead. What's the director's name?
Edgar Wright.
Yeah, it's not Edgar Wright didn't like write it or direct it, but it's like in that kind of vein. So I'm kind of interested in that one too. I can't remember what the fuck that one is called. But there's just a lot of horror out right now at Fantastic Fest.
Yeah, I haven't been able to get to the movie theater in a long time because to get to the Regal by my house in a long time because of a variety of like just busy doing other shit.
Yeah.
And right now, Speak No Evil is there. Never Let Go, which is I think the new Halle.
I saw a trailer for that.
As I'm talking to you, my friend Jared of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, that's his podcast. Yeah. He just texted me, and all I see across the top of my screen is from him, The Substance, best movie of the year and maybe the decade.
Holy shit. Jesus, that's quite some praise.
Yeah. So he's my horror trivia partner. We do Brooklyn Horror Society trivia, at Lucky 13. And then we also do Final Exam Horror Trivia at Rock Bar in the city. That's the one hosted by Mike Gingold and Ted Gagan.
Okay, but so that guy that just texted you, though, he's not the guy that said to you that scene in the Boba Fett show was like the greatest moment of his life, right?
No.
Okay. I was gonna say that guy has some hyperbole over there, but okay. Well, Jesus Christ, man, the substance. I gotta go see that at some fucking point. To me, more, man. All right, well, that's a good stopping point for our show. Danny is going on a trip, so we're not going to record this weekend, but I'm sure he'll be back with a vengeance, covering some other stuff. But like I said, if you guys haven't subscribed, please do. Leave us some comments. Let us know what your favorite Stephen King adaptation is. And we will see you guys when I am, just like Danny,